Good evening, my friend. Before we begin tonight's story, I want to ask you a simple question. Do you know the name of the most powerful person alive? Not the president of any country. Not the head of any corporation you have ever heard of. Not a celebrity, not an athlete. Not someone the world recognizes when they walk into a room. If I asked you to name the most powerful person on earth, your list would probably start with the President of the United States, or perhaps the leaders of other major nations. Maybe you would think of technology billionaires, names like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, perhaps someone who controls vast media empires. But all of those people, and I mean all of them, answer to someone else, someone they almost certainly would not want to cross. And tonight, I am going to tell you who that person is. His name is Larry Fink, and I guarantee you have never heard of him. More importantly, I guarantee that his name does not trigger any sense of recognition, because that is exactly how he prefers it. Because in the world of truly enormous power, there is one golden rule. Money whispers. It does not shout. The story of how a single man from a middle-class American family rose to control more wealth than most nations produce in a year is a story about failure, obsession, technological genius, and a loss so catastrophic that it broke him completely. It is a story that will help you understand why your mortgage costs what it costs, why certain companies prosper while others fail, and why the financial systems that determine the entire world's economic fate are controlled by machines that most people do not even know exist. So settle in, get comfortable. This is the story of Larry Fink and the empire he built in the shadows. Chapter 1. Why Larry Fink was nothing like you think. To understand Larry Fink, you must first understand the world he came from. And that world was not a penthouse overlooking Manhattan. It was not a country club in Greenwich, Connecticut. It was not an exclusive preparatory school for the children of billionaires and senators. Larry Fink was born on November 2nd, 1952, in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Van Nuys, to be precise. His father was a shoe salesman. His mother was a teacher. They were not poor, but they were not wealthy. They were solidly middle class, which in 1952, America meant something very specific: stability, hard work, respect, and a certain kind of invisibility. His parents believed in education. They believed that intelligence and determination could open doors that birth and bloodline could not. They were right, of course. But there is a cost to that belief. When you grow up in a household where achievement is the currency, you learn that failure is not an option. You learn that your worth is measured by what you produce, not by who you are. That lesson would shape everything Larry Fink would become. His childhood was structured, disciplined, and somewhat lonely. While other children were playing in the streets, young Larry was studying. While his peers were at parties, he was working. The other children in Van Nuys did not quite understand him. He was not particularly athletic. He was not particularly social. He was different, and different children are often alone. But that loneliness had a gift embedded within it. It gave him time to think, time to observe the world around him and notice things that others missed, time to develop the habit of analysis that would one day reshape the entire global financial system. In 1968, when Larry was 16 years old, he made his first investment, not in stocks, not in bonds, in his own education. He applied to UCLA, one of California's finest public universities. He was accepted. His parents were proud. The message was clear. Education was the path forward. At UCLA, Larry studied business and economics, but more importantly, he learned a crucial lesson that most people never understand. He learned that the world's most important decisions are not made by elected officials or celebrities. They are made by invisible people working in offices, analyzing numbers, predicting the future, and moving money in ways that reshape entire nations. After UCLA, Larry Fink did something that his parents might not have fully expected. He became obsessed with bonds. Not the glamorous world of stock trading that occupied the imagination of Wall Street in the 1970s. Bonds. The dull, seemingly boring world of fixed income securities. Bonds were what normal people owned. Bonds were what pension funds owned. Bonds were what insurance companies owned. Bonds were the foundation of the entire financial system, and almost no one paid attention to them. But Larry Fink was not interested in glamour. He was interested in power. And he understood something that few people understood. The most powerful people in finance are not the ones making the flashiest trades. They are the ones who understand the systems that everyone else ignores. In 1976, at the age of 23, Larry Fink joined First Boston Corporation, one of the most prestigious investment banks in the world. He was assigned to the bonds department. It was not a glamorous assignment. The stock traders made more money and got more attention. But Larry Fink saw something in bonds that others missed. He saw the future. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, bonds became increasingly complex. They were no longer simple instruments. They were securities backed by mortgages, auto loans, credit card receivables. They were being sliced, diced, restructured, and resold in ways that previous generations of bankers would have found incomprehensible. Larry Fink became brilliant at this world. By 1978, at the age of only 25, he was running the entire bond department at First Boston. By 1980, at the age of only 27, he was the youngest managing director in the bank's history. By 1981, at the age of 28, he was the youngest person ever appointed to the bank's management committee. The sky, it seemed, was the limit. But the sky is not infinite, and limits, when they come, often come faster than we anticipate. By 1984, Larry Fink had become something of a legend on Wall Street. He had helped create new financial instruments. He had helped structure deals that seemed to violate the laws of physics. He had made his department hundreds of millions of dollars. Some people estimated that he had personally contributed more than $1 billion to First Boston's profits through his trades and innovations. He was wealthy. He was respected. He was powerful. He was 31 years old. And then everything changed. It was the spring of 1986. Larry Fink and his team had made a bet on the future. They had analyzed the economy, looked at the trends, examined the data, and come to a conclusion. Interest rates, they predicted, were going to rise. Based on this prediction, they had taken a massive position in the market. They had placed all their bets on one outcome. And then the market moved in the opposite direction. Interest rates did not rise, they fell. And when they fell, Fink's team did not just lose money. They catastrophically lost money. The hedges they had set up to protect themselves failed. The carefully constructed safeguards that were supposed to prevent disaster collapsed. In the second quarter of 1986, Larry Fink's department lost $100 million. $100 million in the span of a few weeks, based on a prediction that turned out to be wrong. In modern currency, adjusted for inflation, that loss would be equivalent to approximately $250 million today. But it was more than just money. It was reputation. It was status. It was identity. Overnight, the man who had been treated as a genius became a pariah. People who had been friendly to him in the hallways stopped making eye contact. Business associates who had wanted to work with him found reasons to be unavailable. The invitations to the most exclusive dinners and meetings dried up. He was not fired officially, but he was made to understand that he was no longer welcome. For 2 years, Larry Fink watched his career deteriorate. He watched younger traders move past him. He watched his colleagues receive promotions that should have been his. He watched the respect he had so carefully built evaporate like morning mist. In the spring of 1988, 3 years after his catastrophic loss, Larry Fink left First Boston. He did not leave triumphantly. He did not leave as a powerful executive moving to a better position. He left in retreat. He left in defeat. He left as someone who had failed. But it was in that failure that the seeds of something extraordinary would be planted. Because Larry Fink had learned something in those 3 years of humiliation and isolation. He had learned that genius is not enough. He had learned that brilliant prediction is not enough. He had learned that success is not enough. What you need is the ability to understand risk, true risk, not just the risks you think about, but the risks you cannot see. The risks that will destroy you precisely because you do not anticipate them. And Larry Fink made himself a promise. Never again would he be caught off guard. Never again would he fail to see a catastrophe coming. Never again would he be humiliated. He was going to build a machine that could see the future. Not predict it exactly, but model every possible version of it. He was going to build something that would give him and the clients he would one day serve total, complete, absolute control. He did not know it yet, but he was about to change the world. Chapter 2. How one man built an empire when nobody was watching. To understand what happened next in Larry Fink's story, you need to understand something about America in 1981. The country was in crisis, not the slow, grinding crisis of poverty and despair. No, America was experiencing something more complex and more painful. It was experiencing a crisis of faith in itself. The 1970s had been a decade of humiliation. Vietnam had ended in defeat. The Middle East was in chaos. Iran had taken American hostages. The economy was broken. Something called stagflation gripped the nation. This was a situation where prices were rising, but wages were not rising faster, where unemployment was high, where investment was declining, where it felt like America was in irreversible decline. In 1980, an actor named Ronald Reagan was elected president. He had been the governor of California. He had hosted a television show. He was not a traditional politician in the way that Americans understood politicians. He was a performer. He understood narrative. He understood how to tell a story that made people feel hopeful about the future. And the story he told was this: America's problem is not capitalism. America's problem is government. America's problem is too many rules, too many regulations, too many bureaucrats, too many taxes. If we just get government out of the way, if we just unleash the power of private enterprise, if we just let businessmen do what they do best, then America will rise again. It was a seductive story. And in 1981, when Ronald Reagan took the oath of office, he began to implement that story. The first thing he did was cut taxes. Not slightly, dramatically. The top tax rate fell from 70% to 50%, and then continued falling. The message was clear. If you are rich, you will get to keep more of your money. If you are a businessman, you will have more capital to invest. If you're a corporation, you will have more profit to deploy. In theory, this money would flow into the economy. The rich would invest in new businesses. New jobs would be created. Everyone would benefit. It was called trickle-down economics, and it was an article of faith for the Reagan administration. But something more important happened on a less visible level. Reagan began to systematically dismantle the regulations that had governed the financial system since the Great Depression. The most important of these regulations was something called the Glass-Steagall Act, passed in 1933, immediately after the stock market crash that had triggered the Great Depression. Glass-Steagall was simple in concept. It separated banking into two types. There were commercial banks. These were boring, safe institutions that took deposits from regular people and businesses and made loans. There were investment banks. These were flashy, risky institutions that played the stock market, that made speculative bets, that lived and died by their ability to predict the future. The genius of Glass-Steagall was this: the boring commercial banks could not take the money of regular Americans and use it to make risky bets. The money of regular people was protected. It was kept separate from the gambling games that investment banks played. But under Ronald Reagan, Glass-Steagall began to be dismantled. Brick by brick, piece by piece, the wall between boring safe banking and reckless risky banking was taken down. This was exactly the moment that Larry Fink was about to enter the financial world in a completely new way. And for Larry Fink, this moment was perfect. In 1988, just as Glass-Steagall was being progressively dismantled, and just as the Reagan administration was reaching its peak of influence, Larry Fink joined forces with Stephen Schwarzman. Schwarzman was a different kind of animal from Larry Fink. Where Fink was analytical and careful, Schwarzman was bold and aggressive. Where Fink was obsessed with preventing disaster, Schwarzman was obsessed with making money. Together, they founded a company called Blackstone. The idea was this: they would find undervalued companies on the stock market. They would buy them. They would strip away the inefficiencies. They would sell the pieces. They would pocket enormous profits. It was called leveraged buyouts. And in the 1980s, it was the most powerful way to make money on Wall Street. Blackstone fit perfectly into the Reagan-era philosophy. These were businessmen who understood markets. These were not bureaucrats. These were profit seekers. These were innovators. These were exactly what the Reagan administration thought would fix America. But Blackstone had one weakness. The partners at Blackstone understood how to buy companies and restructure them. They understood how to turn industrial companies into cash machines. But they did not understand the world of debt. They did not understand bonds. They did not understand the complex financial instruments that were increasingly being used to finance these deals. And that is where Larry Fink came in. Larry Fink created a division within Blackstone. He called it Blackrock. The idea was simple. Blackstone would find companies to buy, and Blackrock would help figure out how to finance those purchases. Blackrock would analyze the risk. Blackrock would structure the debt. Blackrock would make sure that the entire deal made financial sense. For the next 6 years, from 1988 to 1994, Larry Fink operated in the shadows. He was brilliant, but he was not famous. He made enormous amounts of money for Blackstone, but he did not have the public profile of Schwarzman. He understood everything about risk management, but nobody really cared about risk management as long as money was being made. The 1980s were easy. The Reagan tax cuts meant that businesses had capital. Glass-Steagall was coming apart, which meant that traditional banks could now take risks that they had never been able to take before. The economy was booming. Companies were being bought and sold constantly. Money was flowing into Blackstone like a river. But in 1989, something changed. Someone looked closely at the financial system and realized something disturbing. The financial system was beginning to feel fragile. This someone was Paul Volcker, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Volcker had been appointed in 1979 by President Jimmy Carter. His mission was to kill inflation, and he had done it. Inflation had come down from over 14% to about 3%. He had saved the American economy. But as he looked at the 1980s, he saw something that worried him deeply. There was too much debt in the system. There were too many risky bets being made. The financial system was like a building that looked stable from the outside, but had termites eating away at the foundation. In 1989, the first major financial crack appeared. A savings and loan institution failed. Then another one. Then another one. By the early 1990s, hundreds of savings and loan institutions had failed. It was not a full-scale financial crisis, but it was enough to put fear into the hearts of experienced financiers. And it was in the midst of this fear that Larry Fink realized something crucial. In the years to come, the people who would survive and prosper would not be the ones making the most aggressive bets. They would be the ones who best understood risk. They would be the ones who could see disasters coming before they happened. He began to have a radical thought. What if he built a company that did not exist to make money for itself, but to help other people manage risk? What if he built a company that could analyze any portfolio, any investment, any financial instrument, and tell clients exactly what could go wrong? It was a dangerous thought in the early 1990s. Everybody was making money. Everybody was confident. Everybody believed that the future could only be positive. Who wanted to pay someone to worry about what could go wrong? But Larry Fink had learned that lesson in 1986. He had learned what it felt like to be blindsided by disaster, and he had vowed to never let that happen again. Chapter 3: The algorithm that predictions nobody else could make. In 1994, something happened that would change the trajectory of Larry Fink's life and, unknowingly, the trajectory of the entire global financial system. Stephen Schwartzman, his partner at Blackstone, walked into Larry Fink's office and made him an offer. It was the kind of offer that happens in Wall Street movies, but almost never in real life. Schwartzman was offering to let Fink buy out his share of Blackrock. Schwartzman would retain a stake, but Blackrock would become an independent company. Fink would be the founder and CEO. Schwartzman's motivation was simple. Blackstone was doing very well. It did not need Blackrock anymore. Schwartzman was willing to let Fink and his team take the company they had built and run it independently. Fink did not hesitate. He and his team negotiated hard. In the end, the deal was set. Fink's team would pay $240 million to Schwartzman to buy their independence. The company would be called Blackrock, and it would be free. It was a risky bet. Fink had taken on enormous debt to buy his freedom, but he had something that Schwartzman did not fully appreciate. He had Ben Golub. Ben Golub was a programmer. He was not a trader. He was not an analyst. He was a man who understood how to translate complicated mathematical ideas into code. In the basement of their small office, Golub had been working on something extraordinary. He had been building a computer system that could analyze risk in ways that no computer system had ever been able to analyze risk before. The system was not perfect. It was not even that sophisticated by modern standards. But in 1994, it was revolutionary. Fink and Golub called it Aladdin. It was an acronym for something technical that almost nobody remembers. What people do remember is what Aladdin could do. Imagine you are a pension fund manager. You have billions of dollars that you need to invest. You have stocks. You have bonds. You have real estate. You have all sorts of investments scattered across the world. And you need to understand one simple question. What is the worst that could happen to my portfolio? Not the best case, the worst case. Traditional finance would have you do some calculations, run some scenarios, maybe hire some consultants. You would end up with an educated guess. That was the best that anyone could do. But Aladdin was different. Aladdin could run thousands of scenarios, millions of scenarios. It could take every piece of information about your portfolio and run it through 10,000 different hypothetical futures. It could show you not just what could go wrong, but all the different ways that things could go wrong. It could assign probabilities to different disaster scenarios. It could show you which risks were truly dangerous and which risks were manageable. It was, in essence, a tool for seeing the future. Not predicting it with accuracy, but modeling it comprehensively. The problem was that nobody wanted to buy it. The mid-1990s were once again a time of enormous optimism. The Cold War had ended. The internet was booming. Technologies that seemed impossible 5 years earlier were becoming mainstream. The stock market was soaring. Money was cheap and easy. The last thing anyone wanted to do was pay someone to tell them what could go wrong. For 3 years, from 1994 to 1997, Blackrock struggled. Fink had a phenomenal product, but he had no customers. He had a brilliant idea, but the world did not yet understand that it needed brilliant ideas about risk management. The world was too busy making money. And then, in 1994, Larry Fink got his first big customer. It was General Electric. General Electric was in a jam. The company had recently purchased an investment bank, and that investment bank had been caught up in some insider trading scandals. Worse, the bank had a massive portfolio of financial securities worth billions of dollars. Nobody could figure out exactly what was in that portfolio. Nobody could figure out whether the securities were valuable or worthless. Nobody could figure out if GE was going to lose money or make money. GE called Larry Fink. They asked him if Aladdin could analyze their portfolio. They asked him if he could tell them what they had and what it was worth. Fink said yes. He did not know if Aladdin could do it. But he needed a customer badly enough to take the chance. For the next several months, Fink's team worked on the portfolio. They fed GE securities into Aladdin. They analyzed them from every angle. They ran scenarios. They modeled outcomes. And gradually, Aladdin revealed the truth about what General Electric was holding. Some of the securities were worth less than GE thought, but some of them were worth more. More importantly, Aladdin was able to give GE a comprehensive map of the entire portfolio. GE could now see not just what they had, but what risks they were running. The analysis was so comprehensive and so accurate that GE was stunned. This was not just another financial advisory firm. This was something new. This was a tool that could see things that other people could not see. GE became a client. They began to give Blackrock more work. They began to give Blackrock more access to more portfolios. And word began to spread. By 1996, Blackrock had dozens of clients. By 1997, it had hundreds of clients. By 1998, it was becoming clear that Larry Fink had created something that the world actually needed. But there was something else happening at the same time. The internet boom was becoming more intense. Companies with no profits, no business model, no real way to make money were becoming worth billions of dollars. Investors were throwing caution to the wind. The idea of worrying about risk seemed almost quaint. And then, in 1999, as the millennium approached, the stock market reached such dizzying heights that it seemed like gravity itself had been suspended. The Nasdaq index was soaring. Technology stocks were multiplying in value. Investors who had never made an investment in their lives were quitting their jobs to become day traders. The idea of a crash, of a correction, of a market downturn seemed impossible. But Larry Fink had built a company that was obsessed with the impossible. And Aladdin was showing him something very clearly. It was showing him that the market had become unsustainably overvalued. It was showing him that the risk had become unconscionable. It was showing him that a crash was coming. In private meetings with his clients, Fink began to warn them. He told them that the market was in a bubble. He told them that the valuation of internet companies made no rational sense. He told them that people needed to be careful. His clients did not want to hear it. They were making money. Why would they listen to someone telling them to worry? But Fink did not back down. He had learned a lesson in 1986. He had learned that the people who survive financial disasters are not the ones who make the most money going up. They are the ones who lose the least money on the way down. And then, on March the 10th, 2000, the Nasdaq index reached its peak, and then it started to fall. And as it fell, all the warnings that Larry Fink had been giving came true. Companies that had been worth billions were revealed to be worthless. Investors who had been confident became panicked. The bubble burst almost overnight. For most of Wall Street, it was a disaster. For Larry Fink, it was a vindication. His clients, who had listened to his warnings, had moved their portfolios to safer investments. While the rest of Wall Street was getting decimated, Fink's clients were only slightly down, or in some cases, slightly up. Suddenly, everyone understood what Aladdin could do. Suddenly, everyone wanted to work with Blackrock. Suddenly, Larry Fink was no longer an interesting idea. He was a necessity. And from that moment on, everything changed. Chapter 4. How disaster made him unstoppable, and how Blackrock became the most powerful company in the world. By 2003, Larry Fink was a wealthy man. Blackrock was managing billions of dollars. Aladdin was becoming a tool that serious investors could not live without. The company had offices in multiple countries. It was respected. It was powerful. But Fink was not satisfied. He had built something that helped people manage risk, but he had not yet built something that gave him the level of influence that he craved. That all changed in 2006. In 2006, BlackRock acquired Merrill Lynch's asset management division. It was an $8.6 billion acquisition. Suddenly, BlackRock's assets under management doubled to over $1 trillion. BlackRock was no longer just a tool used by others. It was now a principal player. It was now managing enormous amounts of money on behalf of pension funds, insurance companies, universities, and individuals around the world. Then, in 2009, something extraordinary happened. The financial crisis of 2008 had devastated the world. The housing market had collapsed. Banks had failed. The stock market had dropped by more than 50%. Unemployment had soared. Millions of people had lost their homes. The global economy was on the verge of complete collapse. In the midst of this catastrophe, the government asked Larry Fink for help. The government needed someone to analyze the toxic assets that were poisoning the financial system. The government needed someone to understand what was salvageable and what was not. The government needed Aladdin. The US Treasury Department contracted Blackrock to analyze the portfolios of failing banks. Blackrock got access to the internal financial records of institutions that had failed. Blackrock got to see, in excruciating detail, exactly how the financial system had destroyed itself. This was an extraordinary gift. It was like giving a doctor access to a dead body so he could perform an autopsy and learn exactly what had gone wrong. In 2009, as the crisis was reaching its peak, Blackrock was given an even more extraordinary opportunity. Barclays Bank, one of the oldest banks in the world, was in trouble. Barclays had a massive division called Barclays Global Investors. This division managed trillions of dollars. It owned the iShares platform, which was one of the most popular exchange-traded fund providers in the world. But Barclays was in trouble. The bank needed to raise capital desperately. The only way to do that was to sell off BlackRock's division. And the government was willing to help make a deal. Fink swooped in and negotiated a purchase price of $13.5 billion. In one transaction, BlackRock acquired trillions of dollars in assets under management. The iShares platform gave BlackRock the ability to reach ordinary investors, not just institutions. After the 2009 acquisition, BlackRock had become the largest asset manager in the world. Fink had approximately $2.7 trillion under management. He had somehow managed to emerge from the greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression, not just intact, but dramatically stronger. The question that many people had asked was, how did BlackRock avoid the catastrophe that destroyed so many others? The answer was simple. Because Fink had Aladdin. Because Fink understood risk better than anyone else. Because Fink had positioned BlackRock to benefit from the disaster rather than be destroyed by it. By 2020, BlackRock was managing over $5 trillion. By 2025, that number had grown to approximately $12.5 trillion. Think about that number for a moment. $12.5 trillion. To put that in perspective, the entire GDP of the United States is only about $28 trillion. The entire annual output of goods and services of the richest country in the world, the country that has been the dominant economic power for over a century, produces only $28 trillion per year. And Larry Fink's company controls $12.5 trillion that already exists. That is not production. That is wealth. That is capital. That is the money that is used to buy companies, to fund governments, to decide which businesses thrive and which businesses fail. $12.5 trillion is a number so large that it is almost incomprehensible. If you took that $12.5 trillion and divided it equally among every man, woman, and child on Earth, each person would receive approximately $1,600. If you took that $12.5 trillion and spent it at a rate of $3 million per day, it would take over 11,000 years to spend it all. And all of that money flows through Aladdin. All of those investment decisions go through Aladdin's analysis. All of those risky positions are evaluated by Aladdin's algorithms. This is where the real conspiracy theories begin. And this is where it becomes very difficult to separate fact from fiction. The question that many people ask is this: does Aladdin have too much power? Can a single system, run by a single company, controlled by a single man, analyze so much of the global financial system that it essentially becomes the global financial system? According to BlackRock, absolutely not. Aladdin is just a tool. It helps people make better decisions. It helps clients understand risk. It is not making decisions for anyone. It is just providing information. But that is where you have to think carefully, because information in the modern world is power. If I know something that you do not know, if I can see risks that you cannot see, if I can predict outcomes that you cannot predict, then I have power over you. And Blackrock, through Aladdin, sees financial risks that the rest of the world cannot see. Blackrock understands which companies are going to fail. Blackrock understands which assets are overvalued. Blackrock understands which sectors are about to boom. Does Aladdin take action on that information? Does Blackrock make trades based on what it learns from analyzing its clients' portfolios? Blackrock says no. Aladdin provides information to clients. Blackrock makes its own investment decisions separately. But here is the thing about the most powerful people in the world. They do not need to make explicit agreements to coordinate. If we all see the same data and reach the same conclusions, we will make the same decisions without needing to talk to each other. When I have a tool that tells me the future better than anyone else has a tool that tells them the future, I have an advantage. And over time, advantages compound. By 2025, BlackRock was the largest shareholder in over 440 companies in the S&P 500. That means that in nearly 9 out of every 10 major American companies, BlackRock had a significant ownership stake and a seat at the table. This raised a question that economists have been arguing about for years. When a single institution owns significant pieces of all the major competitors in an industry, does competition still exist? If BlackRock owns pieces of Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Fanta and Sprite, does Coca-Cola really compete with Pepsi? Or are they all just different products under the same umbrella of control? If BlackRock owns pieces of Delta Airlines and United Airlines and Southwest Airlines, does competition really exist among those airlines? Or are they all just different manifestations of a single entity? Some economists argued that this was a new form of capitalism. Others argued that it was the death of capitalism. Most argued that they did not know what it was, but that something fundamental had changed in how the global economy functioned. And through all of this, Larry Fink remained in the shadows. He was not a celebrity billionaire. He did not give flashy interviews. He did not make grand pronouncements. He simply managed the largest pool of capital ever assembled under a single roof. He had come from Van Nuys. He had been humiliated in 1986. He had built a company based on the principle of understanding risk. And in doing so, he had become possibly the most powerful man on earth. And almost nobody knew his name. Chapter 5. The company that owns every house on your street. If you drive through the suburbs of America today, you will see something that would have been unthinkable 2 decades ago. You will see entire neighborhoods where almost every house is owned by a corporation, not owned by the people who live there, owned by a company, and that company sends an employee to collect the rent every month. This is the story of how that happened, and it is the story of Larry Fink's final and most ambitious play for power. By 2010, the financial crisis was technically over. The stock market had stopped falling. Banks had stopped failing. The worst of the panic had passed. But for millions of ordinary Americans, the crisis was not over. It was just beginning. Across America, families who owned homes were facing a new disaster. The homes they had purchased were now worth less than they had paid for them. In some cases, much less. They were underwater on their mortgages. They owed more than their houses were worth. In many cases, These families could not pay their mortgages anymore. They were facing foreclosure. They were about to lose their homes. From one perspective, this was a tragedy. Millions of families were losing the most valuable asset they had ever owned. The dream of home ownership, which had been the foundation of American prosperity for generations, was evaporating. From another perspective, this was an opportunity. There were millions of houses that were being taken away from their owners. There were millions of houses available at deeply discounted prices. There were millions of families who no longer owned homes but still needed places to live. For Blackrock and for other large asset management companies, this was not a tragedy or an opportunity. It was a business model. In 2011, an investment company called Invitation Homes began buying up foreclosed homes. Invitation Homes was partially owned by Schwartzman's Blackstone, the company that had given birth to Blackrock. But Invitation Homes was also partially owned by other investors, including Blackrock. The strategy was simple. Buy single-family homes that had been foreclosed upon. Buy them for pennies on the dollar. Buy hundreds of them. Buy thousands of them. Buy tens of thousands of them. Then rent them out to families who had lost their homes. Within a few years, Invitation Homes and similar companies had purchased somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million single-family homes. This was not an exaggeration. It was not conspiracy theory. It was a documented business model. For context, there are approximately 140 million single-family homes in the United States. So corporations owned roughly between 0.3% and 0.7% of all single-family homes. In the suburbs hardest hit by the foreclosure crisis, the percentage was much, much higher. In some neighborhoods, over 50% of homes were owned by corporations. The strategy was profitable, but it was also transformative. When a neighborhood where every house is owned by a different family transforms into a neighborhood where every house is owned by a corporation, something fundamental changes about that neighborhood. Gone was the sense of community. Gone was the investment in maintaining the property. Gone was the pride of ownership. What remained was a landlord-tenant relationship. Thousands of single-family homes became the inventory of a rental business. For families like the ones we discussed earlier, families like the Campbells and the Smiths, this transformation was devastating. The dream of buying a home, of building equity, of one day owning something outright was no longer available. They were tenants now. They would probably be tenants for the rest of their lives. The rent they paid was determined not by what was fair, but by what the market would bear. Every time their lease renewed, the landlord could raise the rent. If they could not afford it, there were other families who could, and the corporation would simply evict them and find someone else. This is what the economist Joel Kotkin called neo-feudalism. He argued that America was returning to a system that had not existed since the medieval period. A small number of super wealthy people controlled the land. Everyone else worked the land or lived on the land and paid rent. There was no path to ownership. There was no way to build generational wealth. There was just the endless payment of rent. And who benefited from this system? Investment companies. Asset managers, Larry Fink and Blackrock. Between 2010 and 2020, American households lost somewhere between $7 and $9 trillion of wealth due to the foreclosure crisis and the subsequent housing market collapse. That represents roughly 1/3 of all household wealth that was destroyed or evaporated. How much wealth was generated by corporate investors buying those homes and converting them to rental properties? Somewhere between $3 and $5 trillion, depending on how you calculate it. So roughly half of the wealth destroyed by ordinary Americans ended up in the hands of large corporate investors. This did not happen by accident. It happened because Larry Fink understood something about the 21st century economy that most other people did not understand. He understood that the future would not belong to people. The future would belong to institutions. The future would belong to capital. And the way to maximize capital returns in such a world is to own the things that people need to survive. You own the houses. You own the companies. You own the infrastructure. You own the means of production. And everyone else works for you. By 2025, when Larry Fink was approaching his 73rd birthday, Blackrock had completed its transformation. It was no longer an asset management company in the traditional sense. It was a shadow government. It was a shadow central bank. It was a shadow provider of all the essential services that human beings needed. Blackrock was a stakeholder in every major pharmaceutical company, every major healthcare provider, every major pharmaceutical company and major healthcare provider, which meant that Blackrock had influence over what medicines people could afford and what healthcare they could receive. Every major technology company, every platform that people used to communicate, every company that provided the infrastructure of the digital world. Blackrock had an ownership stake in Google. Blackrock had an ownership stake in Microsoft. Blackrock had an ownership stake in Meta. Blackrock had an ownership stake in Amazon. Every major energy company, oil, gas, coal, renewable energy, Blackrock owned pieces of all of them. This meant that Blackrock had a financial interest in the energy decisions that affected whether the planet would become uninhabitable. Every major media company, television networks, publishing houses, digital media platforms, Blackrock owned pieces of the companies that told you what to think and how to perceive reality. Every major bank, every major financial institution. Blackrock was woven so deeply into the fabric of the global financial system that you could not separate Blackrock from finance itself. This was not a conspiracy. This was just how capitalism worked at the scale of $25 trillion. When you control that much capital, when you have analyzed risk so thoroughly that you can see around corners that other people cannot see, when you can model the future more accurately than anyone else can model the future, you become more powerful than presidents. And that is exactly what Larry Fink had become. He was not elected. He was not appointed by any democratic process. He held no official position in government. But he had more influence over the decisions that shaped human life than virtually any human being alive. And if you asked him, he would say that he was simply managing risk. He would say that he was simply trying to understand what could go wrong. He would say that he was simply trying to help his clients achieve their financial goals, all of which was true, and all of which obscured the larger truth, which was that he had become the most powerful person on earth. Chapter 6. The invisible hand that controls everything and why you never see it. To understand the full scope of what Larry Fink has built, you need to understand something about modern power that most people never think about. In the traditional model of power, power was visible. A king sat on a throne. A president held office in a capital city. A general commanded an army. Power had a face. Power had a location. Power could be challenged. But modern power is different. Modern power is invisible. Modern power is distributed. Modern power is embedded in systems and algorithms and financial instruments that most people do not understand and cannot see. Larry Fink has built the ultimate invisible power structure, not through force, not through political office, not through any formal position at all, but through control of capital. By 2025, BlackRock's annual letters to CEOs had become something like papal encyclicals. They were released on a schedule that CEOs anticipated with anxiety. They contained instructions, sometimes explicit and sometimes implicit, about what they should do and should not do. In 2020, Fink began to push an agenda known by the acronym ESG, Environmental, Social, Governance. The idea was that companies should be graded not just on how much money they made, but on how well they treated the environment, how responsibly they treated their workers, and how well their leadership was managed. On the surface, this seemed reasonable. Who would argue against environmental protection or social responsibility? But what happened in practice was more subtle and more troubling. Companies that scored high on ESG metrics received lower interest rates on loans and higher valuations on the stock market. Companies that scored low on ESG metrics found themselves punished. Investors sold their shares. Companies found it harder to raise capital. And who decided what was ESG and what was not? Ultimately, rating agencies that were often paid by the companies they rated, and those rating agencies were funded by major asset managers, including BlackRock. A former ESG executive at BlackRock named Tariq Fancy came forward in 2021 to expose what he saw as a massive fraud. Fancy argued that the ESG movement was not actually designed to change corporate behavior. It was designed to extract premium fees from investors who felt good about investing in responsible companies. Fancy said that inside BlackRock, there was no genuine belief that ESG investments would actually change the world. The internal analysis showed that ESG criteria did not correlate with better environmental or social outcomes. It was just marketing. What ESG really did was give Larry Fink a new lever of control. If a company did not do what Fink wanted, he could lower its ESG rating. If a company did what Fink wanted, he could raise its ESG rating. The market would react accordingly. This was power of a very sophisticated kind. Not the power to order someone to do something. The power to shift incentives until they do what you want anyway. By 2025, the influence of Aladdin and BlackRock had become so pervasive that it was almost impossible to identify where influence ended and where it began. BlackRock had former executives scattered throughout government. Government officials had previously worked at BlackRock. The revolving door between the financial system and government had become so normalized that nobody even noticed it anymore. When the financial system needed help, BlackRock was called. When governments needed to understand complex economic data, they went to Aladdin. When central banks needed to analyze markets, they used BlackRock's research. It is important to understand that none of this is necessarily illegal or even unethical by the standards that currently exist. Fink has not broken laws. He has not engaged in secret conspiracies. He has simply done what any sophisticated capitalist would do. He has built a system to serve his interests, and then he has worked within that system very competently. But the question that haunts all of this is whether such a concentration of power in a single institution, controlled by a single person, even if exercised through legal means, represents a threat to democratic capitalism itself. Democratic capitalism is supposed to work through competition. Multiple actors competing against each other. No single actor becomes too powerful. Power is diffused. But what happens when a single actor controls so much capital that it can influence the decisions of all other actors? What happens when a single company owns significant stakes in all the major competitors in an industry? What happens when the risk analysis system that guides investment decisions across the world is controlled by a single company? These are not simple questions, and there are legitimate arguments on both sides. On one side, you have people who argue that Larry Fink is exactly the kind of person who should be influential. He is brilliant. He understands risk better than anyone else. He has no political ideology pushing him in particular direction. He simply wants to make good investments and make money. The fact that he is influential is simply a result of his competence. On the other side, you have people who argue that concentrations of power this large are inherently dangerous, regardless of the character of the person wielding that power. They point out that even well-intentioned leaders can make catastrophic mistakes. They point out that the incentives of Blackrock may diverge from the incentives of humanity. They point out that we have seen many examples throughout history of powerful people who were absolutely certain that their vision was correct, and who imposed that vision on the world with terrible consequences. The answer, I think, is that both perspectives are correct. Larry Fink is precisely as competent and well-intentioned as his supporters claim, and the concentration of power that he has accumulated is precisely as dangerous as his critics claim. These two things are not mutually exclusive. Power is dangerous, and sometimes power is concentrated in the hands of competent, well-intentioned people. And sometimes the result is positive, and sometimes the result is catastrophic. What matters is transparency and accountability. What matters is understanding that this power exists. What matters is asking hard questions about whether this is the kind of world we want to live in. Because whether we like it or not, we are living in a world where one man, through his control of capital and his mastery of complex financial systems, has accumulated more influence over global decision-making than virtually any person in human history. That is not a conspiracy. It is not hidden. It is simply how modern capitalism works at this scale. And it is very difficult to know if that is a problem that needs to be fixed, or simply the inevitable evolution of how human civilization organizes itself. Chapter 7. The most powerful person will never be famous, and that's the point. Before we close this evening's story, there are a few more things you should know about Larry Fink. He lives well. Not ostentatiously, but well. He owns apartments on Fifth Avenue in New York. He owns a property in Westchester County, which is sometimes called the American Riviera because of its concentration of wealthy residents and country clubs. He owns a ranch in Colorado, where he fishes for trout and hikes in the mountains. He does not own yachts or collection of exotic automobiles. He does not attend award shows or give flashy interviews. He's not trying to become famous. He is already too powerful for fame to matter. His net worth is estimated at approximately $1.2 billion. That might sound like an enormous amount of money, and it is. But it is a fraction of the $12.5 trillion that flows through his company. Most of his personal wealth is derived from his ownership stake in Blackrock and the salary he receives as CEO. He is married to a woman named Lori. They have 3 children. By all accounts, he is devoted to his family. He does not appear to have any of the dysfunction that sometimes characterizes people who have accumulated extreme amounts of power. By the standard metrics that we use to measure human beings, Larry Fink appears to be a good man. He is generous. He supports various philanthropic causes. He gives to education. He appears to care about the future of the world. But he is also the man whose systems manage the money that is used to buy politicians, reshape industries, and determine which human beings have access to the resources they need to survive. This is not a moral contradiction. It is simply a reflection of how modern capitalism works. The same system that gives a man the power to shape global outcomes also allows him to be a good husband and father. The same algorithms that help manage trillions of dollars can also reflect their designers' genuine desire to make the world a better place. And that is perhaps the most unsettling part of this entire story. If Larry Fink were a villain, if he were cruel or stupid or obviously malicious, then the story would be simpler. We could understand it as a story about how a bad man accumulated too much power. We could hope that he would eventually be stopped, or that his power would diminish. But Larry Fink is not a villain. He is a genuinely sophisticated person who understands complex systems. He is someone who has thought deeply about risk management. He is someone who genuinely believes that his system is making the world better, and that makes the question of whether he is dangerous infinitely more complex. In the movie version of this story, there would be a dramatic confrontation. There would be a moment where someone stood up and said, "No, we will not allow this concentration of power." There would be laws passed. There would be reforms. There would be a resolution. But this is not a movie. This is reality. And in reality, concentrations of power rarely dissolve on their own. They either evolve, sometimes becoming less dangerous, sometimes becoming more dangerous, or they are destroyed by external forces. The question facing the world in the years ahead is whether this concentration of power will evolve in positive directions or negative directions, whether Larry Fink and Blackrock will use their influence to make the world more stable and more just, or whether they will use it to enrich themselves at the expense of everyone else. And that answer is not predetermined. It depends on the choices that Fink makes, the pressure that society applies, and the evolution of the systems themselves. What we know for certain is that the world has changed. The world is no longer governed by a small number of visible actors, making decisions in transparent forums. The world is increasingly governed by an invisible network of capital flows, algorithmic decisions, and concentrated power. And the man who stands at the center of that network is Larry Fink. He does not want to be famous. He does not seek out publicity. He would probably prefer that you had never heard his name, because his power is greatest when it is least visible. But you have heard his name now. You have heard his story. You understand, at least partially, how one man emerged from humiliation and loss to build the largest financial empire in human history. And perhaps that understanding is the first step toward deciding whether this is the kind of world we want to live in. Because the future is not predetermined. The future is something that we shape through our choices. And one of the most important choices we will make, whether we realize it or not, is whether we accept the world that Larry Fink is building, or whether we demand something different. I do not have the answer to that question. I suspect that nobody does. But I know that you cannot make a choice about something that you do not understand. And I know that understanding Larry Fink and Blackrock and Aladdin and the concentration of power that has occurred in the financial system is one of the most important things you can do to understand the world you are living in. So tonight, as you settle into sleep, I hope you're thinking about what you just heard. I hope you are considering what it means for one man to have this much control. I hope you're asking yourself what kind of future you want to live in. Because the most powerful man in the world is counting on the fact that you will not ask those questions. He's counting on the fact that you will not understand what he does. He's counting on the fact that you will be asleep. But tonight, you are not asleep. Tonight, you are awake. Tonight, you understand. and that matters. Good night.